And then you're going to need to add another 100 on top of that because, well, you are a fucking wop, mate. Shalom and welcome to episode 12 of the Real Life Podcast. This is a bit of a different one today. It's sort of a new structure. Might continue this as an idea, might not, but essentially this is two recent cinema experiences I had that I got very different vibes from. So, I recently went to the cinema just on my own to watch Jordan Peele's new film, Nope. And on a quick note about going to the cinema by yourself, it's absolutely 100% an excellent idea, and I will die on this hill. It's weird because people always say that it's a bit sad, and maybe this is me convincing myself that it in fact isn't. But they always say that going to the cinema is a social thing, it's something you do with a group of friends on an evening. And what I want to know is, why? Why is it that? Because you're not meant to talk during the film, and if you're going to take it in properly, you're not going to want to be nattering on, so why do you have to go with someone? I mean, it's perfectly fine to go on your own and then discuss it with someone in the pub later, or go back to someone's house and talk about it that way, but it's just a relaxing activity, if nothing else. Plus, it means you can see what you want to, instead of settling for an upsettingly, democratically made decision, as we are all too familiar with recently. Let's not delve too far into political issues, because I'm just going to die. Anyway, I digress. As far as Nope goes, I absolutely adored it. Like, I properly loved it. So much so that when my dad asked if I wanted to see it again with him, because he hadn't seen it, it was absolutely no hesitation. Yes, very much down for this. I'm not always a serial rewatcher of films in the cinema, but I will definitely rewatch them again if they come out on demand later on. But this was one of the first times of recent that I've actually decided to go to the cinema a second time to view a film. And then a couple of days after that, my gran was visiting us and my mum was taking her to the cinema, so I thought I'd join. Now, on reflection, I sort of wish I hadn't, because I saw one of the worst films that had existed in a very, 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 very long time. Which is strange, because the reviews have broadly not been as scathing as I'm about to be. But what I do is I thought I'd take this opportunity to review the two, because you're going to get both sides of me today. One talking about Nope, and the other talking about Mr. Malcolm's List. It wouldn't have been my choice, but obviously, as I say, went along and decided, you know what, let's just go with this, let's see what it is, maybe I'll enjoy it, maybe I'll get on with it more than I think I would from the trailer. A full spoiler warning is in place, so watch Nope before you listen to this, because otherwise I'm about to ruin everything and every image, and it's not going to have the impact that it's meant to. But I thought I'd talk about, as well, at the end of this, the importance of seeing a variety of films, or, you know, the importance if you're someone like me. So you're getting two very close together cinema experiences which resulted in very, very different feelings. So, shall we start with the good? Nope is the third feature film from Jordan Peele, and I have to say he is fast becoming one of my favourite directors and writers, because he's writing and directing on each of the three films. I think the man is a genius. He has an incredible ability to intricately link every aspect of a film to its key theme. And there are countless examples of this in each of the films, Get Out, Us, and Nope is no different. The details in his work that I love are like this example from Get Out. When Chris is first being shown around the house, they start talking about Dean's mother. As they get into the kitchen, Dean says, "We keep a piece of her in here," and the camera pans into the kitchen with Georgina standing there, who of course is the essence of Dean's mother in a black woman's body. Stuff like that, I think, is absolutely glorious. When the line fits with the imagery and it fits the key themes all together in one, fantastic. There are countless things that I like in this film, but here's the main story. A horse ranch in California called Haywood Hollywood Horses, Triple H, supplies movies and sets with horses for films and adverts. OJ, who's played by Daniel Kaluuya, his father runs the ranch as an expert horse wrangler. However, he's killed in a freak accident by a coin falling from the sky, and so the responsibility of the ranch and its work is placed very much on OJ and his sister Emerald, played by Keke Palmer. However, over time, through sightings of strange objects, still clouds in the sky, and power outages, the two start to suspect there is alien activity around the area and may have been involved in their father's death. And in an attempt to catch it on film, the quote-unquote Oprah shot, they are determined that they will get that shot. So, it's something that actually, as a concept, we haven't seen that much of so far. The actual capture of UFOs on proper cameras, and if people will believe what you present to them, is something that feels very current. It feels similar in message slightly to Don't Look Up, which had this whole, these scientists have noticed this meteor, they're telling everyone about it, will they believe them, or will they just go the classic society route of going, no, I'm not going to believe this? And that is, again, one of the leading themes of this piece. But the leading themes also are far from being about UFOs, as of course is always the way with Jordan Peele, because it's not just a film about let's explore if people would believe us getting this on camera. No, there are themes about animal cruelty and the treatment of animals during films, objective nature of people's faith, monetary capitalism, or the desire for popularity. And I think they're all explored thoroughly and accurately in this film. You just have to look into it a bit more, but I like films like that. I actually didn't think it took very long. It's not a short film. It's a kind of length that I might normally have a little bit of a moan about. And of course, some bits of it could have been cut or made shorter or taken out, but it didn't feel like it went on for very long. It felt like an enjoyable experience. It set up suspense incredibly well by incorporating us into that world perfectly and giving us slow steps as the introduction went on to the alien and the situation. The Gordy incident is a perfect thing for the film to be based around, and I'll get onto that. Every scene or element fits into its themes, and I think that's genius. I think the film is fantastic. It looks fantastic. It has a real relatable script with excellent performances, excellent CGI. I think it's visceral. It needs the big screen. And it has one scene in it which gave me the uncomfortable and shaken feeling I only used to get as a kid watching horror films. And it's rare that horror films stay with me or elicit that kind of emotion with me, because a lot of the time they're doing the same stuff as normal, or they're just presenting a weird image. But even an image that is unnatural or gory doesn't normally stick with me. But this particular scene did. I think the character arcs in the film are excellent. Notably, Angel's character. I think this might be, and it's close with us because that almost hit overkill, but I think this might be the film which uses the most physical props or images in the frame to reinforce the messages of the piece. Now, I know that's a bold claim because both the other films did it very well and it's consistent throughout Peele's work. However, I think it does it most effectively because there's so much you can look into, which in this instance isn't necessarily in the foreground. The image that I think is always a bit too much from us is when they pass the guy holding the Jeremiah 11:11 sign. That isn't something that's placed carefully in the background, that's something that's forced a bit down your throat, and it feels like, yeah, it's a good representation of what the message is or what the themes of the piece are, but it's a little too on the nose. This is cleverer than that. I've noted many clever images and ideas that are used within it, such as the slush machine at the Duke performance, the motorbike comparison, the TMZ helmet, but my favourite is the sky dancers. You know, those big wobbly things that they have outside car dealerships that wave around and look like a froob has gone wild. They are perfect metaphor for the enticement of audiences by colourful lights and theme parks, which I've spoken a little bit about when talking about Scorsese and his comments on Marvel. When the motivation is blind, unchecked, capitalistic intrigue, the sky dancers are the perfect metaphor for that, because they are literally blowing hot air up someone's arse. Genius, perfect. And the fact that they're featured so heavily shows their importance. There's been a lot of debate in terms of the images leading to messages about the upturned shoe and the way that it sort of balances perfectly on its back end. For a long time I didn't get it. I had to do a lot of thinking about it, but I do get it now. Because near the end of the film, Chris talks about bad miracles. You know, they're not always good. Miracles aren't always good. The shoe standing on its end is an example of something beyond comprehension, but not in the positive, uplifting way of a regular miracle. it was a harbinger of the destruction caused by Gordy and the inevitable build-up to his breakout. So let's talk about the Gordy thing, because I mentioned it at the start and how important it was to the whole piece, so it needs to be delved into. With Gordy and the entire scenario around it, even the footage we're shown of the family comedy, the emphasis is always on the people, or the treatment of the animals is inferior. The film begins with the audio of the intensely unfunny family sitcom, like it plays over the logos at the start, and it has canned laughter which really hammers home what feels like the insult of the treatment of the monkeys in this particular. I think the monkey that goes wild is called Eli. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm going to refer to them as that. The treatment of these monkeys is unpleasant, and all to create this absolute garbage, but you know, it's what makes money, so people do it without any care for the animal's well-being. Even in the run-up to Eli playing Gordy going wild, Jupe messes up a line, and there are 3 people, the father in the show, the mother in the show, and the director off-screen, who reassure him and remind him he's okay, and everything's fine, don't worry, you're doing great. But the camera never once shows the monkey, and no one is ever paying any attention to the monkey. We don't even know if they are looking at him properly. It's as if his welfare isn't important. And then after the attack, after the balloons come up and Gordy goes wild, Eli goes wild, that's important, when the father comes down the stairs trying to escape with Jupe under the table, he doesn't calm the monkey down by calling it Eli, its real name. He calls him Gordy. And so he gets absolutely munted when he runs into the kitchen. Whereas it seems that Jupe is different. The opening shot of the film after the logos is a reading from a Bible verse from Nahum. It says, "I will pelt you with filth, I will treat you with contempt and make you a spectacle." Now, some people are saying that is in relation to what Jean Jacket does, Jean Jacket being the UFO. But I think that's completely missing the point. I think it's a note on what the animals under human treatment feel like and what our attitude is towards them. And it is exactly the same mistake that Jupe makes. I also think in that particular instance, the only time we see black characters in this film is OJ, Emerald, and their dad. And they are in charge of the horses, and I think there is a less forward but still present message about race and the treatment of black people on film sets and all that kind of stuff within this. And I think that's an important thing to note, but actually I think it's further back in terms of its importance in this film than it is in Get Out and Us. Those feel like much more prominent statements, whereas this one, it's still there, but it's not one of the more prominent themes. This one is more about the animals themselves, but it's just a clever link that he's put in there to make it, you know, sort of feel a bit more real. This, it gets to the point where, with the spectacle thing, that's the exact mistake that Jupe makes when he grows up. So Jupe thinks that because he clearly had that special bond with Eli, shown they're about to fist bump before, he has a bond with the animals and they can work together at his command, probably because he's a kid and, you know, he likes animals and treats them in the right way that you're meant to, as kids often do. But what he thinks is that this means he has a control over all animals, and what he does is make the fatal mistake that the producers of Gordy tried to make, or producers of Gordy's Home made themselves, which is this: you may think that you have a bond with an animal, but if you do, that means you should treat it with respect like you would a human being or any creature. That doesn't mean you can then exploit that relationship with the animal for monetary gain, and that is the precise mistake that Jupe makes, because he treats the UFO exactly like that, like a performing animal meant to come in at the right time, and gets slightly nervous when it doesn't come in at the right time, for good reason, it's shown. But the result of the Jupe live show, that is what happens when this kind of problem is left unaddressed, and that is the scene which made me feel the most uncomfortable. It's the Gordy moment, but for Jean Jacket instead. The alien actually acts like a horse. It's slightly scatty, but, you know, again, it doesn't kill you if you treat it with respect. Ergo, a horse is not going to do anything bad to you if you treat it with respect, but the people at the start, when they're making the advert, don't. And that's the key thing, because the scene after the opening credits, which takes place, the opening credits take place in the guts of Jean Jacket, which I only noticed second time around. Perfect reincarnation of the events of the film. They are warned of the dangers of mistreating the animal, and then they do, and nearly hits the fan as a woman nearly gets buckarooed to next Tuesday. But that scene where Jean Jacket eats the audience at Jupe's show, and then the shot in, oh, good Goodness gracious. I don't know what it was. It was perfectly done. The fact that it essentially got aspect ratio on that shot, but to show a sort of the claustrophobia and the unpleasant nature that I would imagine is being inside the guts of a UFO while you're being slowly osmosized into a food source. But I thought that moment was so powerful and so long-lasting and so eerie and creepy because it was set up perfectly by the stilted nature of the Jupe live show before that. I think that whole scene is a work of genius, and I think that should go down in history in cinema as one of the great horror scenes. It's fantastic. It does everything it needs to, and it sets it up perfectly and finishes it perfectly and leaves you going, well, I hated that, so it means it did its job. In terms of getting the Oprah shot, that is actually genius. The setup to catch it is genius. The mirror image of Chris getting on a horse whilst M gets on a motorbike at the end, towards the end of that battle, shows they're completely different characters, which is, again, something you see throughout the film. Chris is conservative, small c, thank you very much, by the book, and old school. M is excitable, quote-unquote new school, and wild, and that is again reinforced by their phones. A simple prop, but it tells you everything about the two of them. Chris has a flip phone and tries to take a photo of the kids dressed up as the aliens on that, which of course looks like a potato, whereas she has an iPhone and is constantly using it and utilising all of the things on it. Hello, this is Dom in editing here. I forgot to talk about a particular element of those two characters that I really liked, and it's an element of Chris, really, but it's just another metaphor or image that is used to perfection in this. It's his hat. Now, when his dad dies at the beginning, his hat falls off him and starts flying around and looks exactly like Jean Jacket. It looks like the alien with the little hole in the bottom of it and the sort of beige outside. And I think the hat is used again as a motif when Chris is wearing his, because he wears it, if you notice, slightly off his head, like at the top of his head, but it's not like clamped down like you would expect a hat to be. Instead, it is loose. It's not quite on. And I think that's showing the affinity he eventually has with Jean Jacket, I think, because he isn't completely sunk into that hole, that orifice of Jean Jacket, if you kind of get what I'm saying. It's as if he's sort of at ease with it or at one with it, like he has this sort of affinity with it, but without being swallowed. He's treating it with enough respect. I think that's a magnificent image. Anyway, back to Other Dom. I think the final scene is great. The whole setup from the beginning of the plan with Holst to the actual capture of the photo with Jean Jacket is chef's kiss. It's perfect. The music's great, the tension's fantastic, it looks brilliant, and you don't ever feel lost or like you don't know what's going on. Angel Torres, as I mentioned before, is a quality character, and his progression's fantastic. As a horror film, there are moments when it properly fulfills that genre. However, as with both of Jordan Peele's other films, it isn't the straight-up horror film that everyone expects it to be. A lot of people find they have a weird relationship with Jordan Peele's films, and I think I know why. I think people went into Get Out or Us, or they saw it on Netflix and they saw the tags on it, the genre tags, and saw horror as one of them. And so they were expecting a more straight up, jump scary, supernaturally vibe type of film. However, the benefit of these films is whilst they do some classic horror stuff, but new takes on it, they also add in a thriller and psychological element to them, which makes them beyond that. Midsommar is psychological in that it's really, really weird. If it was just trying to be your classic stereotypical horror film, the reveals that are done throughout that film would just be jump scare, jump scare, jump scare, jump scare. But it takes you through this whole weird process, and it submerges you in the world and gives you character relationships to follow. And then, as a result, the moments of horror feel like they stand out much more because you are invested and you feel like you are in the world. And also your mind is thinking about all the other elements of the story, making it feel more real. How many times have you been watching a horror film and said, why won't you just ring the police or run out the door, you stupid bitch? In these films, it feels like a real experience, ergo, you feel more connected and more trapped by it. And that is what a horror film should do, and that is what these films do. It's probably the least horror-y of all of them, I think, on balance. Us being the most, Get Out probably in the middle. I think it's only just behind Get Out. But there cannot be any sort of ignoring of the horror elements in it because they're important and fabulous and gripping. The thing is, I think it works well in its favour that it's not a complete horror film and it's not a complete thriller, because I think every thriller, to me, could benefit with a few moments of horror rather than straight up action, or event. I think there needs to be stuff like what Peele is doing in all thrillers, not necessarily supernatural or unworldly or anything like that, but the type of suspense he builds, particularly in Get Out, which I know then moves into a slightly strange plot, when you get to the brainwashing stage. But up until then, there's a fantastic, sequence of events which build suspense rather than just being a thing happening and then a thing happening, and you don't know you don't know the twists and turns. You don't know the twists and turns, but it's more than not knowing the twists and turns. You feel engrossed and you feel like you are there, and you feel like each moment hits better because there is build-up and suspense and investment in it, and that's important. Look, I appreciate there cannot be incredible symbolism or theme, motifs in every frame or scene or shot, but there are a few directors who try their utmost best to make that happen, and to me, Peele is one of them. Greta Gerwig is another. But I just adore how much detail and thought is in every element of the shot. There's not a lot of what I call directing for directing's sake, which is when you use the camera to show the events of a scene and that is it. You can use lighting, you can use framing, you can use positioning, you can use so many elements of a shot to just give a subtle bit of subtext about what a character is going through or what a story beat might mean or anything like that. And this is a prime example of that being used perfectly. I hope you have watched it before listening to this, but do watch it if you somehow moronically have made it this far. Go to the cinema and watch it. It's magical. On the flip side, Mr. Malcolm's List is absolute drivel. It's awful. It's a poor effort, and I felt deeply bored. Look, I have to be fair on this film and not just call it shit, because that's not how film criticism works, unless you do Rotten Tomatoes. Side note, do not pay attention to Rotten Tomatoes. It is a terrible, terrible guide as to how good a film is, okay? Just know that, okay? It's not worth your attention. So, basically, I came to see this film because it was an afternoon's entertainment for my gran, and I thought it'd be nice to go along with her. So, the basic idea of it is this. This is a period dramedy in which Julia is rejected publicly by Mr. Malcom, who's deemed the most eligible bachelor in town, and then hatches a plan to show him how awful he is by using her attractive friend Selena to pretend to woo him by changing her behaviour to fit a list of requirements that Mr. Malcom has for potential suitors. However, as anyone with more than 5 brain cells can work out, the two actually do end up falling in love legitimately before Julia finds out their love is real and loses her shit. Now, I call it a dramedy because I think it is trying to be a drama and a comedy. The problem is, it's neither. I'm being very nice to it when I say it's trying to be a drama, because its tone is very much comedy, but it is severely, and I mean severely, unfunny. It's a slob of a film. The script is written by the author of the book which the film came from, Suzanne Allain, I think it is. Elaine, not quite sure. And based on this evidence, the book is also terrible if it's written by the same person, because none of it is funny. Julia being, in no uncertain terms, an arse seems like the only punchline that Suzanne Allain is capable of thinking of. I don't think I laughed once. I smiled about twice, but never once did that even near a chuckle or a giggle or anything else. So, why is it so bad? Because you need to justify these opinions, Dom, otherwise you're just the most miserable bastard on the planet. So, the plot line is completely paper thin. The characters are horrendously underdeveloped. You can see absolutely everything from a mile away, and I mean everything from a mile away. There is not an ounce of new in this film whatsoever, and this is direction for direction's sake. There is nothing clever or subtextual or subtle about any frame, and I want to make it clear, that is allowed. You do not have to fill every single moment with symbolism and subtext. That's not what I'm saying. You are perfectly well within your rights as a director to use a specific scene or section of the film where you have to use the camera to just show what's going on. Sometimes that has to be done. I understand that completely. But in this film, it's the whole way through it, and it makes everything completely dull. It is presented as it is, but what it is complete garbage. It appears to me to be trying to take a leaf out of the book of the personal history of David Copperfield, which is an absolutely gorgeous film. Except Mr. Malcolm's List has none of the wit, none of the charm, and for 85% of the film, and I hate to say this because I don't normally have to, nobody appears able to act very well. I will make an exception for Mr. Malcolm, who is played by Soap Dirisu, who actually gives a relatively decent account of himself because he's not working with much at all in terms of the script. But bar that, it's incredibly poorly done. I tried to find something out of it, anything which gave it a sense of merit, something that I could think, they landed that well, that was right, they deserve credit for this. And I settled on the sets being well constructed, and they use good locations. It's filmed in Ireland, so there's lots of pretty scenery. As I say, the insides of the old Regency buildings are well made. They look as they should. They fit a period drama very well. The costumes are fine. Nothing excellent, but nothing poor. They definitely do the job. They'll do. But I wasn't blown away. And that's sort of as far as I got. The script was dire. The acting was poor until the last 15% of the movie, and then suddenly everyone goes, shit, we're meant to have been acting, come on, there's a BAFTA at stake! And then they decide to turn it on. The direction was basic. The score was incredibly unoriginal. I hated the score. I think most of it would fit over the bake-off. It would fit Sue Perkins pushing her glasses back into her face, because the film was trying to tell us that this was a funny and plonking story in which what larks we had, that kind of mood. But when it's not funny, that annoys the living tits off me. It just makes you feel like you're watching a really weak first-time Edinburgh Fringe show where they're not experienced and nothing quite lands as it's meant to. There wasn't a single utterance of laughter from the audience in the cinema that I was in. I mean, it was in a small cinema in the countryside, so, it wasn't exactly full. But, okay, apart from this, and this, I think, may be my overarching problem with the movie. The main character, Julia, who is played by Frida Pinto, is intensely annoying. And it feels like the film wants us to take her side, and I don't. I don't care for her, she irritated me, and her storyline is written by an actual child. This was obviously written as a light-hearted piece, and it wasn't taking itself too seriously. I understand that, and it must be understood when you're watching the film, but it doesn't take away the criticism that I have for it. It's way too long. Nothing happened for the first 1.5 hours of the film, and I mean really nothing. It's literally just meaningless talking. Some of it was unbearably unfunny. It was trying to be sort of ostentatious in its language, but was actually fairly straightforward. There wasn't anything really to it that I could pick out and say, I like that and I'll remember that. And also, if I hear, "Dear Selena," once more in the next 4,000 years, I may explode. Do not waste your time watching Mr. Malcolm's List. I came back and honestly, you're going to be like, you need a life, Dom, and yeah, I do. But I came home and was so incensed by this film that I went online to see if there were any people giving it negative reviews and berating it like I had. And dramatically, I was met by people saying it was rather good. And I didn't understand that, because it wasn't. And I think most people that I consider having a decent opinion on films would say it wasn't very good. I'm waiting on the big dogs to hit it up and give it an actual score and a review, and then I'll read them. But, too many. I mean, it probably is, let's be honest. It's probably people who didn't quite invest much in it or didn't try to. They just kind of went along and saw it as a bit of entertainment, something to get them through the afternoon, rather than a film that was trying to do anything about it. And maybe it's my fault for seeing it beyond that. Maybe it's my fault for giving it higher levels of expectation or anything like that. Maybe I should have just seen it as something to fill my afternoon with, and that be that. But again, I can't do that because it could have been better in so many ways, and why make a worse piece when you can make a better one without having to use too much of your, without having to massively extend the budget. It's these are problems that could be fixed by the artists rather than the accountants, and that is what frustrates me, because people could have done this better. So, let's move on to this week's bullshit profound conclusion, because I seem to like coming to those a lot, and it's this. It probably isn't particularly universal, but the idea is that if you're going to understand film in general, or have an idea of film criticism, you need to see as much as possible. And sometimes you end up seeing shit. Like Morbius. One day I'll get through a podcast without mentioning that film. But it's important that you don't filter yourself down to a very narrow genre of films, because you are likely to see far less films that you enjoy because your range is smaller. There's less space for people to make good stuff. But the truth is that several good films are out there, and you will find things you love, perhaps in places you wouldn't suspect. If I hadn't have seen this film, I wouldn't know what it was like, which sounds like the most simple thing ever, yeah? But it's true. To understand what a film is like, to shape your choices or your favourites, or what you label as your preferences, you need to understand the broad scope of film itself, which, by the way, is incredibly broad. I didn't want to see this, but I did, and it was crap, so I kind of feel like I wasted my time, but stay with me. But that isn't necessarily true, that I wasted my time, because I now know that I was right on my assumption when I saw the trailer that I wasn't going to enjoy it, and I know the film, but I could have easily been wrong, and that is an important thing. The more you see, the more you are likely to be proved wrong. Being proved wrong is bloody brilliant. Why wouldn't you want to find a bit of enjoyment somewhere you thought you wouldn't? That's only going to make it more fun. You're only going to enjoy it more, because you'll, instead of having high expectations of a film, trying to meet the specific parameters of what you like, and then leaving feeling satisfied but not thrilled when it doesn't quite meet that criteria. Quite like Mr. Malcolm's list. I never actually but I don't know what that was. But you're going to be more pleasantly surprised if you leave and go, oh, I didn't expect that to be good, but it was. That was fun. I really like that. That was great. And you feel more happy about it if you go into films with a specific set of criteria of what you want to see, and then every film that you watch that doesn't meet that criteria, you are inevitably going to leave every film you watch being incredibly disappointed, and that isn't how you're supposed to do films. I think people will have more fun with films if they let themselves be exposed to more options. Otherwise, people who only watch Marvel films will stick one of them on and claim that certain films are pretty good. Like subjectivity and all that, but objectively, no, they're not very good. And then you have to spend an evening watching a film with them, and then they veto every decent decision you offer in favour of some fourth-rate snooze fest, which had a scene they liked, and it requires 4,583 hours of explanation as to how we got to where we are. But hey-ho! What do I know? That is that for this podcast. It was a slightly odd one. I didn't do much comparison between the two of the films, but that's because there is absolutely no comparison to be made between the films, because they are completely different in that one is good and one is shit. I again apologise for the tardiness of this, but you know what I'm like. You're just going to have to get used to this now. I'll do them when I can, but I do love doing this, but it's just finding the time and finding the right things to talk about. I've got a host of ideas that I want to do, and you'll notice that there was a slight alteration at the start there. That was an impression from a piece of media, be it film or TV, and I'm going to start doing one at the start of every single podcast. Now, I am offering a shout-out to the first person... a shout-out in front of 15 people, how exciting! No, I'm offering a shout-out to the people who are the person who's the first person to message me, telling me which character the impression is of, and from which series or film it is from. So, if you can do that, I will shout you out in the intro of the next podcast. Hopefully I'm not going to run out of impressions. Is this a way of me being selfish enough to just do impressions in here and pretend it's for the podcast? Yes. Do I care? No. So message me on Twitter, Instagram, text me, whatever. The recommendation this week is a lovely film. It is About Time, starring Donald Gleeson and Rachel McAdams and Bill Nye. It's Richard Curtis' movie, but it is just the most gloriously heartwarming thing on the earth. It's sort of Paddington levels of happiness. It's really funny. It made me cry. It's a must-watch, and I think it is on Netflix. So About Time, that is your homework for the week. Or 2 weeks, or 3. And hopefully I will see you again next time. Thank you very much for downloading the podcast, and until then, bye!